Hi, Pastor Matt Morton here, lead pastor at Cross Fellowship Church. Before the message begins, I just want to take a moment and say thank you very much for tuning in. It is our hope and our prayer that by watching this video and hearing the message that indeed it can help you take one step closer to Jesus today. At the end of the sermon today, you'll hear me offer an invitation to the audience. And the invitation is simply to put your trust and your faith and your hope in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. If you're listening today or watching online and you have never done that, can I just encourage you to take the step to put your faith in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. Now, maybe you have some questions or you just need to know more about that or even how to do that. At the bottom of the screen here is a telephone number. That's the church office. Please give that number a call. And if it's during office hours, the staff will direct you towards a pastor to help walk you through how do you put your trust and your faith in Jesus Christ. And if it's out of office hours, please leave a message and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Again, thank you so much for watching today, and blessings.
Well, thank you, Pastor Matt. That's one of the ones that I love with the kids. We always teach them they can pray in a lot of different positions, a lot of different spots. So, but good morning, everybody. Well, before we get started and jump into God's Word, there's a couple of things that I wanted to discuss before that. Well, the first one is I wanted to share a story from my life. About 7 years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to Romania on a mission trip. And while there, I had an opportunity to witness to a young man who had a life very similar to mine prior to me meeting Christ. And so I got into the nitty-gritty details of the struggles that he was having, the sin that he was in, and telling him how Christ had saved me from mine. And I'd kind of forgotten I was there with three ladies from our church. These three ladies, as they're watching Pastor Jeff minister to this person, they're hearing about all the sin in my life. And I had to take some time afterwards to explain to them that all of us have things in our past that we wish weren't there or things that we wish we could change. But ultimately, we're all sinners, saved by grace, just with different brokenness and different sins. I bring up this point today not to point out that we're all sinners, but to assure everyone here that we're not here today to beat up anybody about their past sins. Our message this morning is on the sanctity of life, or in other words, the holiness of life, and how we live out our beliefs. This includes the issue of abortion. Abortion is an issue that is highly charged in the state of Colorado, and believe it or not, even within the walls of the church. Before we take a look at what God has to say about the sanctity of life in detail, I'd like to take a quick look at the book of John, chapter 8, where the scribes and the Pharisees have brought this woman that they want to stone, as Moses has commanded in the law, to Jesus. And in verse 6, it says, Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." I think sometimes it's easy for us to see someone else's sin as somehow worse than our own, but we need to remember that all sin separates us from God, regardless of how we want to rank different sins. No matter what the sin is, we are all saved by grace through faith as a gift from God so that no man may boast. As we get ready to open up God's Word today, I ask you to set aside your biases, personal feelings, past actions, or political leanings, and strive to understand what God has told us about this issue through His holy word. Would you please join me in a prayer? Father, we come to you today, each of us thankful for the life that you've given us, thankful that you love us, and thankful that you have given us your word to help us better know you and to know how you want us to live our lives. Lord, while you forgive us our sins, we know your will for us is that we should not engage in sinful behavior for any reason. Lord, please open our eyes, our ears, our hearts, and our minds today so that we may hear and understand you. If you'd please join me in standing, we're going to start out of the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 16 and 18. If you have your Matthew journal with you, it's page 12. And it says, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise man, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Thank you. You may be seated. Now, I want to take a look at the second half of this first, and then we'll come back and look at the first half. When I looked up in all the commentaries to see what people said about the prophetic piece here, there were a lot of chickens in the people that we normally trust and look to for these kinds of things. One of my favorite, Vernon McGee, just totally skipped it. And it was like, how do we look at a piece from Old Testament prophecy and New Testament prophecy, and where do they mix? And I think that theologian Harry Ironside had the best take on the prophecy application from this quote in Jeremiah. He said, primarily, these words seem to refer to the distress of the mothers in Judah when their sons were taken into captivity. But the passage is cited as fitting perfectly with the grief of those mothers in Bethlehem whose infants were so ruthlessly slaughtered. Often in Scripture, we find these twofold applications. And I think he's absolutely right. That's exactly what this is in this case. So now that we've dealt with that, we jump forward to the first part. And when we look at this, we have to think the murder of children, innocent children who can't defend themselves or even speak up for themselves, is terrible. And this is a sign of just how paranoid and evil Herod was. Now, Herod didn't know the exact time of Jesus' birth, so he decided to hedge his bets and kill 2 years' worth of little boys, little babies. Now, Bethlehem, at this time, a lot of times we think of it as this great big city. Well, it wasn't. It was a small village. And so most biblical commentators believe that there were 1 or 2 dozen children killed in this. Now, whether it's 100 kids, 24 kids, or even 1 that was murdered, I think we would all agree that this is a terrible sin committed by Herod. So, what does this story have to do with us in 2023? Well, let's take a look and see what God has to say about what he believes about life and how we should treat other people. If we jump forward a little into chapter 5 of Matthew, Jesus tells us the blessings that are for God's people when he talks about the expectations for his followers and that we be the salt and the life in a dark world around us. It is with that in mind that we pick up in chapter 5, verse 17. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Please jump with me up to verse 43. And it says, Jesus continues, "You have heard that it is said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends the rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you must be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." So we know that God doesn't want us to kill, and we are to love others, even those who do wrong and those who hate us. Those are 2 very important facts that we must hold on to as we move forward this morning. This year, we're entering into a new era of abortion restrictions and rights in our country. I want to talk with you this morning about why human life is so precious and why God sees it as precious, and why we as Christians should speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Nearly 50 years ago, the case of Roe v. Wade made abortion legal across the United States, and since then, more than 60 million abortions have been performed and 60 million children have been killed in the United States alone. That's more than the population of California and Florida put together, or more than Stalin and Hitler killed together. The overturning of Roe v. Wade hasn't made abortion legal or illegal, but just has let individual states decide what they want to do. Now, in Colorado, before Roe v. Wade was overturned, we made a law that you could have an abortion right up until the moment the baby is born. So that law is still here in Colorado. Places like Oklahoma have outlawed abortion. So really, for us here in Colorado, nothing has changed. But hope is not lost. God has something to say about it, and something to say about it and how we should respond to such evil. We will see that the Old Testament has something to say, and then the New Testament, and then we're going to examine how we can follow Jesus when he tells us that we are to love others. I want to show today how speaking up for those who have no voice is a reflection of the love to which we have been called. So you may be saying to yourself right now, whoa, wait a minute, Pastor Jeff. The killing of babies in Bethlehem is totally different from aborting a fetus. Well, let's take a look and see what God has to say about that. The preservation of human life is rooted in the Old Testament of the law. There are some of those among Christians today who claim that nothing in the Old Testament applies to us because Jesus came with a new covenant and a whole new set of rules. Now, during the time of Jesus' ministry here on earth, there was also a group of people in the Jewish community who were fearful that Jesus might be trying to throw out the God of the Old Testament. You see, less than 200 years before Jesus began his ministry, a man named Judas Maccabeus led a revolt against the Seleucid king who sought to abolish Judaism in favor of the Greek religion. Now, Judas Maccabeus stood up against what was wrong and clung to God's law, even though it cost him his life. You may have heard how the Jews celebrate this revolt that preserved the law, recovered Jerusalem, and led to the rededication of the temple. That's called Hanukkah. So it was in the shadow of this that Jesus knew there were people who were worried that the Old Testament and the New Testament would not be compatible, just as some people say today. Jesus chose to address them in a way that helps understand the connection between the Old Testament and the New. In verse 17, Jesus says, "Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but fulfill." So while the formalities have been replaced by Christ's sacrifice or fulfillment, the foundational truths of the law remain the same. Jesus puts emphasis on his statement in the following verse when he says, "For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished." I don't think that Jesus can be much clearer here that the law still exists. Now, I can take a book like this, and it wasn't a bad book, it wasn't a great book, but let's say I have a page that I disagree with. I can just tear it out and throw it away. It doesn't make a difference in the world. It makes a difference to this little book. I can even take a whole chapter and rip it out and throw it away. It doesn't affect my life. It doesn't affect what I believe, or it shouldn't. But I can't do that with this. This book, we have to take the whole book. We can't pick and choose and take pieces of Scripture that we like and hold on to it and throw out the pieces that we don't like. So we're going to take a look at some of those foundational Old Testament truths to answer some of the questions faced today. Now, God didn't need an ultrasound or years of debate to define the beginning of life, and he makes it clear that we shouldn't either. Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet of the nations." In Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16 tells us, "For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. And my soul knows it very well. My frame was hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." God tells us in Genesis 1:27 that he created humanity in his image. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. While humans have something to do with conception, we need to remember that God was the original designer. And even though we were corrupted during the fall, we are still his special creations, designed especially by him. So something special of the image of God remains in every child, born or not yet born. God does not see us as a mass of cells or an embryo. He sees us as a person from the very moment of conception. God is the giver of life, and we are told that we cannot take it away from someone without just cause. Deuteronomy 32:39 says, "See now that I am he, and there is no God besides me. It is I who put to death and give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver from my hand." 1 Samuel 2:6 says, "The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up." And of course, most of you know Exodus chapter 20 in the Ten Commandments, verse 13. "You shalt not murder." Now, the King James Version says, "You shalt not kill," but that's really not the best translation for this particular verse. The best translation is, "Thou shalt not murder," or even better than that, "Thou shalt not shed innocent blood." And who could be more innocent than an unborn baby or a little toddler? The Old Testament also tells us that murderers will be accountable for their sins, just as all of us will be accountable for our sins. Genesis 9:6 says, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by his blood shall be shed, Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." So this is one of those verses that people tend to twist to justify killing abortion doctors and blowing up clinics. But while these doctors may be seen as our enemies, Jesus has another way for us to deal with our enemies. And we'll take a look at that in just a little bit. This verse from Genesis verifies for us that every baby is made in God's image and is special because of that. Therefore, we should not shed that baby's blood through abortion. The precious nature of human life is reiterated in the New Testament by Jesus in Matthew 5:20. "You have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court.' But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court." So Jesus has already reminded us that the principles of the Old Testament still apply to us, and here he's just repeating it in a way that should get all of our attention. Jesus is pointing out that those who think they are following the law but are missing the underlying reasons of the law, they are putting on a show. They're missing what they're called to. They may see the rules, but miss God's intention. In Colorado, we have a law that says abortion is legal. So many look at that and say, hey, since it's legal, it's okay. We need to remember that man's laws are not the same as God's laws. Now, I received a telephone call from a man in his 20s several weeks after Colorado had made marijuana legal. He told me that he had never smoked marijuana or any other drug, and now, since it was legal, he thought it might be a good idea, since it was now the law of the land. Well, we talked about how it could kill brain cells, carry potential health risks, including cancer, and we came to the conclusion that just because society says it's okay to do something doesn't mean it's good for us to do it. In verse 21, Jesus reiterates that murder is part of the Old Testament law that is still being addressed and still carries a penalty. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He tells us as his followers, we're held to a higher standard. We are to understand that respect of human life goes beyond killing to how we treat others who have this special gift of life that we have. How easy is it for us to be the first one to cast a stone when we were talking about something as emotionally charged as abortion? If we attack the people involved in the abortion, we may be committing a sin equal to or greater than theirs. Jesus is very clear in verse 22 that we are to respect all human life just as he does. I was recently talking to a young woman in her 20s who identified herself as a Christian who is pro-abortion, or as they like to call it, pro-choice. And when I began to point out some of the things that we've talked about this morning, she sought to end the conversation by saying, well, okay, but even if it's a sin, Jesus forgives us from our sins, so it's not a big deal. But it is. It's a big deal. Romans 6:15. There, Paul tells us, he says, what then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? May it never be. So in this way, Paul tells us, yes, we are saved from hell by grace, but that it comes with a responsibility to follow Christ and avoid sin, a responsibility not to make a conscious effort to walk in sin, and not to walk in that sin with the anticipation that it's okay since we are forgiven. Jesus didn't come to earth to give us a stack of get-out-of-jail-free cards. He came to earth to get us out of jail and teach us how to stay out. Does that mean that if a woman makes a decision to have an abortion, that she'll be cast into hell? By no means. As Christ tells us in Matthew 12:31, therefore I say to you, any sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven people, but blasphemy against the Spirit shall not be forgiven. But that does not mean that there are not consequences for being in sin. And we'll address that a little bit more in just a couple of minutes. We have seen that God is involved in new life. New life begins at conception. God sees life as something good that needs protection. Now then, as Christians, do we have an obligation to protect life that is a reflection of God's love for mankind? And if so, are there any ground rules that he's given us? If we jump to verse 43 in Matthew 5, Jesus tells us, you have heard that our fathers were told, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. When we look at this, some people may say that our abortion doctors are the enemy. And if that's so, we are called to pray for them. Other people say this brings to mind the mothers of the unborn babies that are seeking an abortion. They need our prayers too. While being called to action in itself may be daunting, doing it in love with a sense of respect can make it even tougher. But verse 45 shows us that there is a reward for us when we follow this course of action. It says, then you will become children of your Father in heaven. Man, what a wonderful reward to be the children of God. So, how are we manifesting our love for the unborn of our country and their mothers? What will we do? What will we say about the sanctity of life that will show the world that we are disciples of Christ? How will we demonstrate our love for those that Jesus loves? When we look at the prevalence of abortion, it seems to me that all of us are likely to know somebody who's had an abortion. How will we demonstrate our love for those people? There are over 3,000 abortions a day in the United States, an average well over 1 million a year for the last 50 years. And that's 1 in 5 pregnancies ends in abortion. We have many people dealing with the issues of unwanted pregnancy in different ways, and I want to share 3 short stories of people I know that have dealt with the issue of abortion. As I believe by peeking into their lives, we can see how best to love people like them. There were mistakes made by these people in their lives, and perhaps we can avoid making those same mistakes as well as the mistakes of the people around them. As I say in the old TV show, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, and I can tell you none of these people have anything to do with Cross Fellowship. So I would concede that in the church, we're lower in one in 5 pregnancies resulting in an abortion. But I do know that there are women here in our congregation that are healing from an abortion. And that's the case with this first friend of mine. I'd like to tell you about her, and I'll call her Tammy. Tammy was a happy teenager enjoying high school. She fell head over heels for a boy at school. She attended church every Sunday with her parents and had made a decision to follow Christ. She knew she should wait until she was married to have sex, but she and her boyfriend made the decision to have sex outside of marriage, like many people do. Later, she became pregnant. She was terrified and sought counsel from her high school friends. They told her that if she had the baby, it would ruin her prospects for a happy life. She would be ostracized. No one would want to marry a woman with a baby. It would jeopardize her ability to find financial security. So Tammy made the decision to abort her baby. Very few people knew that she had an abortion. She later married another man and had 2 beautiful children. So you might think that Tammy's story has a happy ending, but it hasn't ended yet. Tammy has told her close friends that when she looks at her 2 children, she knows she's missing a 3rd child, and it was her selfish decision as a frightened teenager that took the life of that 3rd baby. Tammy doesn't need to hear from us that her decision was wrong. She knows that. Tammy doesn't need to hear from us that her decision was not what God wanted. She knows that too. Tammy doesn't need to hear that we are passing judgment on her decision, as she convicts herself nearly every single day. What Tammy needs is for us to show her the love of Christ. She needs to understand that all of us sin and fall short the glory of God. She needs to know that Jesus will cover this sin for her. She also needs to know that while we can't take away the sadness or the guilt she may carry for the rest of her life, we can love her just as Jesus loves us. Now, the second friend of mine was my next-door neighbor, Debbie. Debbie attended a private Baptist school nearby. She met a boy at school, made that same decision that Tammy had made along with her boyfriend to have sex outside of marriage. Debbie also became pregnant. When she sought help, she received solid Christian counsel from her parents. She had the same difficult choice as Tammy of getting an abortion or having a baby out of wedlock. Debbie chose not to end the life of that baby inside of her. Again, you might think this was a happy ending to the story, but not so. Debbie was told she could not come back to the Christian school she was attending, as it would send the wrong message to the other students and staff and parents. She and her family were cut off from the church as well. Everybody turned their back on her. They were shamed into leaving the church. The boy, however, kept going to school without any public consequences. And I remember how strange it was seeing my 16-year-old friend pregnant and seeing the hurt that her Christian friends had inflicted on her, while an unsaved wretch like me was still one of the few people that called her friend. Debbie had a little girl, and they both grew up and moved away. And even though they moved away, I seemed to run into her about every 3 to 5 years. Every time I saw Debbie, she was quick to pull out a picture of her little girl. She struggled at times to find a church that didn't judge her and welcomed both of them in. And to make it financially was rough on her. But it was really cool. The last time I saw Debbie, she whips out her wallet. She says, "I got to show you a picture." It's a picture of her little girl holding Debbie's new baby granddaughter. Now, Debbie's choice was hard and was made even harder by some of the Christians in her life. How could those Christians have helped Debbie instead of hurting her? Or how can we help a similar young lady in our congregation? Debbie didn't need to hear that she had made a selfish mistake that resulted in pregnancy. She had the baby to remind her of that every single day. Debbie didn't need to be pushed out of her church and school because she was sending the wrong message. She needed to be loved by her brothers and sisters in Christ, who should realize that every day all of us fall short the glory of God. What Debbie needed was for her family in Christ not to condemn her, but to accept what happened and to support her decision to keep the baby. While having a school of pregnant teens is not what any principal of a parochial high school would want, allowing a pregnant student to continue in might show the dangers of premarital sex to the other students. Now, my third and final story to help us see how to respond is about a congregation of fellow believers in Denver. As many of you may know, I was a police officer up in Lakewood before coming into the ministry. And my lieutenant came to me and he said, "Hey, Sergeant Rogers, I've got great news for you." He says, "We've got a project for you." He said, "We have a group of protesters that are protesting at a house in one of the neighborhoods. And I need you to be the liaison in between the two sides, make sure you keep the peace." Now, I got up there and I found out that, yes, it was a church in Denver was doing the protesting, and the reason they were protesting was the person in the house worked for the construction company that had built a Planned Parenthood. He was the project manager. Now, I got there and first went and talked to him, and he told me that he'd just put in a new security system, hopefully to prevent more vandalism to his house. And his wife and kids had moved out to the in-laws to keep them safe. And he told me that he didn't mean to be doing anything wrong. He just had been working at this place for 20 years. They gave him a project, go build this building, and he went and built it. He told me that he was a Christian and that he didn't believe in abortion. Now, I went out and talked to the pastor, and the pastor told me, "You know what, I really don't care what his reasons are or anything like that. We are going to protest against Planned Parenthood every way we can find, including this way, and we're going to be here until he repents." So a little bit later, I went back, and I'm talking to the guy at the house, and he says, "Sergeant Rogers, I decided that this just isn't worth it. I've quit the company that I was working for so long, and I promise I am never going to have anything to do with building anything for Planned Parenthood again." So I'm thinking, awesome, it's over. I don't have to come out here anymore. And I go and I talk to the pastor and I tell him he's repented. He's decided to move the other direction. And the pastor said, "Well, that's good, but now I want everybody in the company to do it before we're going to leave." Well, the guy doesn't even work for the company anymore. So please don't share this with Lieutenant Camper because he doesn't know I made this phone call. But when I got home that night, I dialed up 9 News. They have like a tips line, and told them both sides of the story. And God bless them. They came out the next day, and they did some interviews and brought up to the pastor that they knew this guy had repented, and that had been their requirement. And it all fizzled out in the next couple days, and they left. So you might think, again, that is a happy ending again. But the problem that was left behind, there were neighbors that were seeing these signs, these grotesque signs of little bodies ripped apart, these signs with all these nasty words and things on them. And so the neighbors who originally sided with the protesters were now saying, "Man, we're rethinking this whole abortion issue because these pro-life people are being so ugly and so mean and so nasty." Absolutely not showing the love of Christ. So our brothers and sisters had good intentions, but they were taking measures that seemed unreasonable, mean, and vile to those looking on it from the outside. And if you think about it, if I'm out in front of an abortion clinic with a sign like that, may I have an effect on a lady going in to have her abortion? Maybe. Mom with her 7-year-old and her 5-year-old and her 10-year-old come driving by. Nothing to do with it, and they see that sign. Have I just made an impact on those kids? Maybe positive, maybe negative, but for sure grotesque. So Jesus tells us that we are to love our enemies. So whether we see these people we don't know, including the doctors and the abortion clinic providers, as our enemies or our friends, we're called to love them, and that we need to respond in love to them. If we don't have a personal relationship with them, it's going to be very difficult to have any influence on their lives. How we can influence them is by making sure that we're not responding in a mean way. and working together with those who have positioned themselves to respond in a loving way, such as the pregnancy alternative centers in our area. Now, I'd like to close out our message this morning with a poem. It's an anonymous poem written by a woman who is recovering from the scars of abortion. It's entitled "The Gift of Life." I would also like to point out, you should see on the screen behind me a slide for Surrendering the Secret. That's a ministry we have here in the church. If you'd like to know more about it, if you've got a friend or a relative or yourself, Lisa Willoughby is going to be out at the counter talking about that. She runs that ministry. If it's something that scar is so fresh still that you don't want to talk to anybody in person, you can email them at that address, call them. You can also contact us here through the church. This poem is entitled "The Gift." I received a gift from a stranger I did not know. I had heard his name before, but in passing, so I let it go. I did not think it was a gift, but rather a terrible burden. They said it was nothing I wanted. Of this, they were certain. I was told it was something bad and more than I could bear. No one mentioned it was precious. It was as if they didn't care. I sent the gift back to the stranger where it came from up above. If only I had met him sooner, I would have seen the gift was made with love. Instead of treating the gift like it was nothing, I quickly sent it back. They told me I did the right thing, but they left out one important fact. See, the gift was made for me by a stranger, and God was his name. I'd never even noticed him, yet he loved me just the same. He had created that precious gift, each piece made by hand to my surprise, and yet I didn't even see it. My life was based on lies. When I found out what the gift contained and realized I had thrown it away, I believed I would always suffer and be punished every day. But to my disbelief, that stranger who I had ignored and turned away created 3 more gifts for me and sent them all my way. I begged for his forgiveness and prayed and felt his love. I wondered what had become of the first gift sent from above. I later learned the gift would remain with our loving God, and then I would meet my baby in heaven and receive the gift again. I have no fear that I will not know which gift was meant for me. So many have been thrown away, but mine I will surely see. For I have dreamed of my little boy whose eyes were big and bright. I will run right over to him and know him at first sight. I will say, Mama loves you. I know that's how I'll start. Then I will thank God for taking care of my baby while we were so far apart. If I could help just one person see their gift contains such love, and that the life inside the little gift came from God above, it would honor my precious baby whose life was lost to a lie. It would stop the suffering of another child and a mother who would be otherwise too scared to try. And we're going to open up the altar here in just a second. Angela Unruh is going to join me up here. If you'd like to come forward and pray with us, or you have anything else that you'd like to pray with, feel free. We're here. Would you please join me in a prayer? Father God, thank you for loving us before we were ever able to be picked up on an ultrasound or through a pregnancy test. And Lord, thank you for loving us today. Lord, I pray that you help heal the scars of those who have gone through an abortion, being the woman or the man attached to it. And Lord, I pray that you give strength to any of those that ever consider this, that they see your love in your creation. Father, we thank you so much. We love you, and it's in your precious name we pray. Amen.